Let me take a moment before this episode to tell you a little bit about the World Ethics Organization and the upcoming Global Ethics Day. Premiering online Wednesday, October 18th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Ethics and Leadership Global Ethics Day Symposium hosted by the World Ethics Organization. This live-stream virtual symposium will cover topics such as what it means to be an ethical leader, why ethical leadership is beneficial to you, your team, your company, and the world, how to integrate ethical considerations into your decision-making process, and practical steps that you can take to create and maintain a culture of ethics. The event panelists are among the world's foremost leaders and influencers in the field of ethics, including Dr. Simon Longstaff, AO, Executive Director of the Ethics Center, Sydney, Australia, and Skeet, Senior Director of Leadership Ethics at the Markula Center for Applied Ethics, Santa Clara University, and Dr. Walter Fluker, Martin Luther King Jr. Professor Emeritus of Ethical Leadership, Boston University. Register and join this live event October 18th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time at worldethicsorganization.org/upcoming events. And thanks. My name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 78. With our book today, the final book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and a book that stands as the author's most compelling commentary on Christian eschatology, Christology, and the worldviews of leadership in desperate and unsure times. J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. This day we fight. By all that you hold dear on this girt earth, I bid you stand. Men of the West. And I pick up in Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, picking up in Book 5, Minas Tirith. Then the old man looked up. Pippin saw his carven face with its proud bones and skin like ivory, and the long curved nose between the dark, deep eyes, and he was reminded not so much of Boromir as of Aragorn. Dark indeed is the hour, said the old man, and at such times you are wont to come, Mithrandir. But though all the signs forebode that the doom of Gondor is drawing nigh, less now to me is that darkness than my own darkness. It has been told me that you bring with you one who saw my son die. Is this he? It is, said Gandalf, one of the twain. The other is with Theoden of Rohan and may come hereafter. Halflings they are, as you see. Yet this is not he of whom the omens spoke. Yet a halfling still, said Denethor grimly. And little love do I bear the name, since those accursed words come to trouble our counsels, and drew away my son on the wild errand to his death. My Boromir, now we have need of you. Faramir should have gone in his stead. He would have gone, said Gandalf. Be not unjust in your grief. Boromir claimed the errand and would not suffer any other to have it. He was a masterful man and one to take what he desired. I journeyed far with him and learned much of his mood. But you speak of his death. You have had news of that ere we came? I have received this, said Denethor, and laying down his rod, he lifted from his lap the thing that he had been gazing at. In each hand he held up one half of a great horn cloven through the middle, a wild ox horn, bound with silver. That is the horn that Boromir always wore, cried Pippin. Verily, said Denethor, and in my turn I bore it, and so did each eldest son of our house, far back into the vanished years before the failings of the kings, since Vorondil, father of Mardil, hunted the wild kine of J.R.R. in the fields of Rhûn. I heard it blowing dim upon the northern marches 13 days ago, and the river brought it to me, broken. It will wind no more. He paused, and there was a heavy silence. Suddenly he turned his black glance upon Pippin. What say you to that, halfling? 13 days, faltered Pippin. Yes, I think that would be so. Yes, I stood beside him as he blew the horn, but no help came, only more orcs. So, said Denethor, looking keenly at Pippin's face, you were there. Tell me more. Why did no help come, and how did you escape, and yet he did not? So mighty a man as he was, and only orcs to withstand him. Pippin flushed and forgot his fear. The mightiest man may be slain by one arrow, he said, and Boromir was pierced by many. When last I saw him, he sank beside a tree and plucked a black-feathered shaft from his side. Then I swooned as was made captive. I saw him no more and knew no more, but I honor his memory, for he was very valiant. He died to save us, my kinsman Meriadoc and myself, waylaid in the woods by the soldiery of the Dark Lord, and though he fell and failed, my gratitude is none the less. Then Pippin looked the old man in the eye, for pride stirred strangely within him, still stung by the scorn and suspicion in that cold voice. Little service, no doubt, will so great a lord of men think to find in a hobbit, a halfling from the northern shire, yet, such as it is, I will offer it in payment of my debt. Twitching aside his grey cloak, Pippin drew forth his small sword and laid it at Denethor's feet. A pale smile, like a gleam of cold sun on a winter's evening, passed over the old man's face. He bent his head and held out his hand, laying the shards of the horn aside. "Give me the weapon," he said. Pippin lifted it and presented the hilt to him. "Whence came this?" said Denethor. "Many, many years lie on it. Surely this is a blade wrought by our own kindred in the north, in the deep past?" "It came out of the mounds that lie on the borders of my country," said Pippin, "but only evil wights dwell there now, and I will not willingly tell more of them." "I see that strange tales are woven about you," said Denethor, "and once again it is shown that looks may belie the man, or the halfling. I accept your service, for you are not daunted by words, and you have courteous speech, strange though the sound of it may be to us in the south. And we shall have need of all the folk of courtesy, be they great or small, in the days to come. Swear to me now." "Take the hilt," said Gandalf, "and speak after the Lord, if you are resolved on this." "I am," said Pippin. The old man laid the sword along his lap, and Pippin put his hand to the hilt and said slowly after Denethor, "Here do I swear fealty and service to Gondor, and to the Lord and Steward of the realm, to speak and to be silent, to do and to let be, to come and to go, in need or in plenty, in peace or war, in living or dying, from this hour henceforth until my Lord release me, or death take me, or the world end. So say I, Peregrine, son of Paladin, of the Shire of the Halflings. And this do I hear, Denethor, son of Ecthelion, Lord of Gondor, Steward of the High King, and I will not forget it, nor fail to reward that which is given, fealty with love, valor with honor, oath-breaking with vengeance." Then Pippin received back his sword and put it in his sheath. You now serve at the right hand of the Steward of Gondor, Pippin. This is a pivotal moment in Return of the King, because not only is the Fellowship broken, not only have there been firefights and death, but great tragedy and loss has come to the Steward of Gondor. And we're going to focus a lot today in our commentary in between the various pieces of Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, that we are reading today. We're going to focus really on thinking about and looking at the actions of two pivotal men in The Return of the King. And then we are going to wrap up by going directly to Mount Doom, where the ring has its final, or gets its final reward. The two men that really form the two towers of Return of the King, actually there's three men that form the triumvirate of Return of the King, are Denethor, the Steward of Gondor, Gandalf, of course, now come back at the turn of the tide, and of course Aragorn, or we met him. When we met him, he was calling himself Strider. He is the one true king, but Denethor doesn't know it. Boromir knew it at the end, And Faramir, well, Faramir's just trying to get his dad to like him. Now, when you serve at the right hand of the Steward of Gondor, here's what you don't understand. The Steward is playing a role. He is a person who is set in place. He is a person who is not the leader, but he's a person who watches over, needs to be protected, makes sure that it is protected, and in some cases goes to his death to make sure that that protection is well-founded. In Return of the King, you can clearly tell that Tolkien read his Shakespeare, because Denethor is a mix of Julius Caesar, King Lear, and Macbeth, kind of all the worst parts of all three of those guys, at least in Shakespearean terms, all rolled into one. This goes directly to an idea that leaders need to grasp early from the Return of the King. And it is this idea: serving a bad steward is bad, but serving a mediocre leader is infinitely worse. And Denethor, as we shall see in our readings today, is not only a bad steward, but he is a terribly mediocre leader. There's a reason for that. Now, it's not immediately revelatory in The Return of the King, but if you know enough about Christology, if you know about eschatology, if you know anything about the Bible at all, you will realize that Tolkien is leveraging Denethor's behavior to make a comment on Gnostic heresies. If you don't know what that means, Gnostic means secret or searching for secret knowledge. And in the early church, the early Catholic Church, back during the time of the creation of the Nicene Creed, there were all kinds of heresies, all kinds of heretical beliefs about the nature of Christ, the nature of the Bible, and the nature of human existence that were floating around at the time. And this was arguments that were occurring outside of the pagan world. The larger pagan culture of Rome, the larger pagan culture of Greece, and of other civilizations didn't much care about the arguments that Christians were having. And the Jews, well, the Jews were too busy dealing with the results, the backwash of their own diaspora that had occurred in 79 AD, when the Romans destroyed the temple, or 76 AD, when the Romans finally destroyed the temple at Jerusalem and got rid of those pestering people, or at least they thought. All they did was send them scattering and wandering throughout Europe for the next 1900 years or so. Anyway, point is, there were a lot of heresies that were going on at that time, a lot of heretical teachings about the nature of Christ. And the Gnostic heresy was an interesting one because it was a pursuit of secret knowledge. It was this idea that said that if you could somehow go beyond the Bible, if you could somehow go beyond the books as they are written in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that you could find out secret knowledge that Jesus was sharing with people, that the people in authority in the year 300 or 200 or 350 or 450 wouldn't share with you. This seduction to secret knowledge is, well, it lays at the roots of secret societies. It lays at the roots of all forms of masonry. It lays at the roots of the Illuminati. And of course, it lays at the roots of folks who are running the World Economic Forum. But I digress. Leaders, and this is the point that Tolkien is making, leaders in search of secret knowledge always wind up committing heresies. Heresies of all kinds. And Denethor, in The Return of the King, was in search of secret knowledge. He wanted to know what Sauron and the evil at Mount Doom was going to do, how hard the hammer was going to fall on Gondor. If you ask him, he believed that was part of his responsibility That was part of his mission, part of his task as being a good steward. And so he used the Palantir, seeing eyeglasses, what we would call crystal balls. He, of course, would have, if Tolkien had decided to put it in the book, would have used runes. But Palantirs are good enough. And in using these Palantirs, he got himself caught up with evil, because that's where Gnostic heresies get you. Look, leaders, there is no secret knowledge. Not at all. There's just knowledge that you have, and then everything else is merely guessing. I return to The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, Book 5, once again, The Siege of Gondor. Back to the book. Gandalf paced the floor. The morning of 2 days ago nigh, on 3 days of journey. How far is the place where you parted? Some 25 leagues as a bird flies, answers Faramir, but I could not come more swiftly. Yester eve I lay at Cair Andros, the long isle in the river northward, which we hold in defense, and the horses are kept on the hither bank. As the dark drew on, I knew that haste was needed, so I rode thence with 3 others that could also be horsed. The rest of my company I sent south to strengthen the garrison at the fortress of Osgiliath. I hope that I have not done ill. He looked at his father. Ill? Cried Denethor, and his eyes flashed suddenly. Why do you ask? The men were under your command, or do you ask for my judgment on all your deeds? Your bearing is lowly in my presence, yet it is long now since you turned from your own way at my counsel. See, you have spoken skillfully as ever, but have I not seen your eye fixed on Mithrandir, seeking whether you said well or too much? He has long had your heart in his keeping. My son, your father is old, but not yet a dotard. I can see and hear, as was my wont, and little of what you have said or left unsaid is now hidden from me. I know the answer to many riddles. Alas, alas for Boromir. If what I have done displeases you, my father, said Faramir quietly, I wish I had known your counsel before the burden of so weighty a judgment was thrust upon me. Would that have availed to change your judgment? Said Denethor. You would still have done just so, I deem. I know you well. Ever your desire is to appear lordly and generous as a king of old, gracious and gentle. That may well befit one of high race if he sits in power and peace, but in desperate hours gentleness may be repaid with death. So be it, said Faramir. So be it, cried Denethor, but not with your death, only Lord Faramir, with the death also of your father and all of your people, whom it is your part to protect now that Boromir is gone. Do you wish, then, said Faramir, that our places had been exchanged? Yes, I wish that indeed, said Denethor, for Boromir was loyal to me and no wizard's pupil. He would have remembered his father's need, and I would have not squandered what fortune gave. He would have brought me a mighty gift. For a moment, Faramir's restraint gave way. I would ask you, my father, to remember why it was that I, not he, was an Ithilien. On one occasion, at least, your counsel has prevailed not long ago. It was the lord of the city that gave the errand to him. Stir not the bitterness in the cup that I mixed for myself, said Denethor. Had I not tasted it now many nights upon my tongue, foreboding that worse yea let in the dregs? As now indeed I find, would it were not so, whether this thing had come to me. Comfort yourself, said Gandalf. In no case would Boromir have brought it to you. He is dead and died well, may he sleep in peace. Yet you deceive yourself. He would have stretched out his hand to this thing, and taking it he would have fallen. He would have kept it for his own, and when he returned you would not have known your son. The face of Denethor set hard and cold. You found Boromir less apt to your hand, did you not? He said softly. But I, who was his father, say that he would have brought it to me. You are wise, maybe, Mithrandir, yet with all your subtleties you have not all wisdom. Counsels may be found that are neither the webs of wizards nor the haste of fools. I have in this matter more lore and wisdom than you deem. What then is your wisdom? Said Gandalf. Enough to perceive that there are 2 follies to avoid. To use this thing is perilous. at this hour to send into the hands of a witless halfling into the land of the enemy himself, as you have done, and this son of mine. That is madness. And the Lord Denethor, what would he have done? Neither. But most surely not for any argument would he have set this thing at a hazard beyond all but a fool's hope, risking our utter ruin if the enemy should recover what he lost. Nay, it should have been kept hidden deep and dark, not used, I say, unless at the utmost end of need, but set beyond his grasp, save by a victory so final that what then befell would not trouble us, being dead. You think, as is your wont, my lord of Gondor, only, said Gandalf. Yet there are other men and other lives and times still to be, and for me I pity even his slaves. And where will other men look for help if Gondor falls? Answered Denethor. If I had this thing now in the deep vaults of the citadel, we should not then shake with a dread under this gloom, fearing the worst, and our counsels would be undisturbed. If you do not trust me to endure the test, you do not know me yet. None the less I do not trust you, said Gandalf. Had I done so, I could have set this thing hither to your keeping and spared myself and others much anguish. And now, hearing you speak, I trust you less, no more than Boromir. Nay, nay, stay your wrath. I do not trust myself in this, and I refuse this thing even as a freely given gift. You are strong and can still see in some matters govern yourself, Denethor. Yet, if you had received this thing, it would have overthrown you. Were it buried beneath the roots of Mindolion, still it would have burned your mind away as the darkness grows, and the yet worse things follow that shall soon come upon us. For a moment the eyes of Denethor glowed again as he faced Gandalf, and Pippin felt once more the strain between their wills. But now, almost it seemed as if their glances were like blades from eye to eye, flickering as they fenced. Pippin trembled, fearing some dreadful stroke, but suddenly Denethor relaxed and grew cold again. He shrugged his shoulders. If you had, he said, such words and ifs are vain. It has gone into the shadow, and only time will show what doom awaits it and us. This time will not be long. In what is left, let all who fight the enemy in their fashion be at one, and keep hope while they may be, and after hope still the hardihood to die free. He turned to Faramir. What think you of the garrison at Osgiliath? It is not strong, said Faramir. I have sent the company of Ithilien to strengthen it, as I have said. Not enough, I deem, said Denethor. Is there that the first blow will fall? They will have need of some stout captain there. There and elsewhere in many places, said Faramir, and sighed. Alas, for my brother, whom I too loved. He rose. May I have your leave, father? And then he swayed and leaned upon his father's chair. You are weary, I see, said Denethor. You have ridden fast and far, and under the shadows of evil in the air, I am told. Let us not speak of that, said Faramir. Then we will not, said Denethor. Go now and rest as you may. Tomorrow's need will be sterner. Shortcuts don't get you anywhere when you're weak. The Steward of Gondor, Lord Denethor, there in that clip, knew he was in a weak position, trapped in Gondor, awaiting the fall of the hammer from Mordor. Knowing that it was coming, he was consumed with coulda, woulda, shoulda. And didn't. We could have had the ring. We should have had Boromir. But we don't. And he couldn't get past that. One of the key themes in The Return of the King and throughout the Lord of the Rings trilogy is the presence of other races in Middle-earth. Wizards, dwarves, elves, hobbits, and of course men. And men are at the bottom of the they're at the bottom of the of the ranking in the estimation of the other races of Middle-earth, partially because Isildur, from which the term Isildur's Bane comes, that's used in the Two Towers extensively. Isildur failed at the end of the, I believe it was the Second Age, to destroy the ring when he had the opportunity, and instead was betrayed by it and was slain, leading to all of the problems in the Third Age, which, of course, when we read The Return of the King and when we read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, we are entering at the end of the Third Age, an age when men will have another shot at the title. And elves and dwarves and hobbits and even wizards will fade from view. Where is the strength in the weakness of men? Leaders who are stewards cannot wait for that strength to show up. They have to demonstrate it before it comes. Now, leaders who are stewards, in particular, stewards like Denethor, can't wait for a savior to lead. And that's basically what Denethor is looking for. Now, he would prefer to have a savior he can manipulate. He would prefer to have a savior that he can control. He would prefer to have a savior that he can tell what to do, which, of course, is not a savior. It's an idol, but let's not get technical here. Leaders who are stewards can't wait on a savior to lead. When they do so, they do what Denethor demonstrated in that little piece there that I read. They do lose faith, and they lose faith in the future. They lose faith in the resources that are around them, and they begin to move from problem solving to problem managing. And that's precisely what is happening to Denethor. That's the axis about which he is turning as he realizes that the savior of the ring is gone, and all he's left with is this old wizard and his son, his youngest son. The loss of hope in a future salvation, and this is a larger point that I think Tolkien wants his readers to know, and I'd like you to know this as listeners today. The loss of hope in a future salvation is the sign of a weak or ineffectual leadership. Let me say that again. The loss of hope in a future salvation, particularly a future Christian salvation, a future salvation based on Jesus, is the sign of a weak or ineffectual species of leadership. Leaders don't often like to hear this, secular or otherwise, because, well, hope implies that you must have faith, that there might be some things that are out of your hands as a leader, that are out of your control, that are past your knowing. And that when those things that are past your knowing and that are out of your control manifest themselves, you've got to have faith, like the song said back in the day. Men in Lord of the Rings and in The Hobbit are portrayed as needing hope to act. On the one hand, this is portrayed as a weakness, but then on the other hand, and Tolkien shows this as well with Aragorn, he shows that ability to hope is what gives men strength, but it's a hidden strength that elves and dwarves and hobbits and ents and wizards even are suspect of and cannot see. And when the strength of hope then begins to rule, well, then it's time for all of the mythical elements to leave Middle-earth and for Middle-earth to become something else. But before that can occur, we need to get rid of the stewards, or the leaders anyway, who have failed in their mission to bring hope to others. back to the book, back to Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. We are continuing to move through Book 5. And of course, we're not reading the whole book. There's no possible way that we can. It's just too much. I would encourage you to pick up the trilogy. I would encourage you to read all 3 parts. It does clock in at without the additional information in the editions that I've got, it does clock in at around 1,300 pages or so. So it'll take you all summer or a couple of years maybe. Yes, you could go watch the movies. They are 20 years old. They are still well done. They still hold up. But there are things that are in the book that are definitely missing from the films. So I would encourage you to at least skim the books, go back, watch the films, and then go back and pick up the things that are in the book. But this is worthwhile reading for leaders. So back to the book. Back to Book 5 of Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, the Pyre of Denethor. "What is this, my lord?" said the wizard. "The houses of the dead are no places for the living. And why do men fight here in the Hallows when there is war enough before the gate? Or has our enemy come even to Rath Dinen?" "Since when has the Lord of Gondor been answerable to thee?" said Denethor. Or may I not command my own servants?" "You may," said Gandalf, "but others may contest your will when it is turned to madness and evil. Where is your son Faramir?" "He lies within," said Denethor, "burning, already burning. They have set fire in his flesh, but soon all shall be burned. The west has failed. It shall all go up in a great fire, and all shall be ended. Ash, ash, and smoke blown away on the wind." Then Gandalf, seeing the madness that was on him, feared that he had already done some evil deed, and he thrust forward with Baragond and Pippin behind him, while Denethor gave back until he stood beside the table within. But there they found Faramir, still dreaming in his fever, lying upon the table. Wood was piled under it, and high all about it, and all was drenched with oil, even the garments of Faramir, and the coverlets. But as yet no fire had been set to the fuel. Then Gandalf revealed the strength that lay hid in him, even as the light of his power was hidden under his grey mantle. He leaped up onto the faggots, and raising the sick man lightly, he sprang down again and bore him towards the door. But as he did so, Faramir moaned and called on his father in his dream. Denethor started as one waking from a trance, and the flame died in his eyes, and he wept, and he said, "Do not take my son from me. He calls for me." "He calls," said Gandalf, "but you cannot come to him yet, for he must seek healing on the threshold of death, and maybe find it not, whereas your part is to go out to the battle of your city, where maybe death awaits you. This you know in your heart." "He will not wake again," said Denethor. "Battle is vain. Why should we wish to live longer? Why should we not go to death side by side?" "Authority is not given to you, Steward of Gondor, to order the hour of your death," answered Gandalf. "And only the heathen kings, under the dominion of the dark power, did thus, slaying themselves in pride and despair, murdering their kin to ease their own death." Then passing through the door, he took Faramir from the deadly house, and laid him on the bier on which he had been brought, and which now had been set on the porch. Denethor followed him, and stood trembling, looking with longing on the face of his son, and for a moment, while all were silent and still, watching the Lord in his throes, he wavered. "Come," said Gandalf, "we are needed. There is much that you can yet do." Then suddenly Denethor laughed. He stood up tall and proud again, and stepping swiftly back to the table, he lifted from it the pillow on which his head had lain. Then, coming to the doorway, he drew aside the covering, and lo, he had between his hands a palantir. And as he held it up, it seemed to those that looked on that the globe began to glow with an inner flame, so that the lean face of the Lord was lit as with red fire, and it seemed cut out of hard stone, sharp with black shadows, noble, proud, and terrible. His eyes glittered. "Pride and despair," he cried. "Didst thou now think that the eyes of the White Tower were blind? Nay, I have seen more than thou knowest, grey fool. For thy hope is but ignorance. Go then and labor in healing. Go forth and fight. Vanity! For a little space you may triumph on the field, for a day, but against the power that now rises there is no victory. To this city only the first finger of its hand has yet been stretched. All the east is moving, and even now the wind of thy hope cheats thee and wafts up Anduin with a fleet of black sails. The west has failed. It is time for all to depart who would not be slaves. Such counsels will make the enemy's victory certain indeed, said Gandalf. Hope on, then, laughed Denethor. Do I not know thee, Mithrandir? Thy hope is to rule in my stead, to stand behind every throne, north, south, or west. I have read thy mind and its policies. Do I not know that this halfling was commanded by thee to keep silence? That he was brought hither to be a spy within my very chamber? And yet in our speech together I learned the names and purposes of all thy companions. So, with the left hand thou wouldst use me for a little while as a shield against Mordor, and with the right bring up this ranger of the north to supplant me. But I say to thee, Gandalf Mithrandir, I will not be thy tool. I am the steward of the house of Anarion. I will not step down to be the daughter chamberlain of an upstart. Even were his claim proved to me, still he comes but of a line of Isildur. I will not bow to such a one, last of a ragged house long bereft of lordship and dignity. What then would you have, said Gandalf, if your will could have its way? I would have things as they were all the days of my life, answered Denethor, and in the days of my long fathers before me, to be the lord of this city in peace, and leave my chair to a son after me, who would be his own master and no wizard's pupil. But if doom denies this to me, then I will have naught, neither life diminished, nor love halved, nor honor abated. To me it would seem that a steward who faithfully surrenders his charge is diminished in love or in honor, said Gandalf. And at the least you shall not rob your son of his choice while his death is still in doubt. At those words Denethor's eyes flamed again, and taking the stone under his arm, he drew a knife and strode towards the bier. But Baragon sprang forward and set himself before Faramir. So, cried Denethor, thou hast already stolen half my son's love. Now thou stealest the hearts of my knights also, so that they rob me wholly of my son at last. But in this at least thou shalt not defy my will, to rule my own end. Come hither, he cried to his servants. Come, if you are not all recreant. Then the two of them ran up the steps to him. Swiftly he snatched a torch from the hand of one and sprang back into the house. Before Gandalf could hinder him, he thrust the brand amid the fuel, and at once it crackled and roared into flame. Then Denethor leaped upon the table, and standing there, wreathed in fire and smoke, he took up the staff of his stewardship that lay at his feet and broke it on his knee. Casting the pieces into the blaze, he bowed and laid himself on the table, clasping the palantir with both hands upon his breast. And it was said that ever after, if any man looked in that stone, unless he had a great strength of will to turn it to other purpose, he saw only two aged hands, withering in flame. Gandalf, in grief and horror, turned his face away and closed the door. For a while he stood in thought, silent upon the threshold, while those outside heard the greedy roaring of the fire within. And then Denethor gave a great cry, and afterwards spoke no more, nor was ever again seen by mortal men. So passes Denethor, son of Ecthelion, said Gandalf. So passes Denethor, son of Ecthelion. Remember I said Denethor was a mixture of Julius Caesar, King Lear, and Macbeth all rolled into one, right? Denethor is also the opposite of what we saw, or his behavior is the opposite of the behavior that we saw demonstrated in the Two Towers by King Theoden of Rohan. Now, Theoden dies, but Theoden dies in glory, on the battlefield, in honor. Denethor dies burning, like the heathen kings of old, in despair, pride, and misspent grief. There's a lesson for leaders here, right? You destroy the thing that you're afraid of, and sometimes that thing is yourself. This is where the Gnostic heresy gets you, right? This is where looking too deeply or too greedily to know everything. This is where wanting to know more than what you can handle gets you into trouble. Leaders would do well to pay attention to the actions of the Steward of Gondor, who winds up on a pyre, trying to burn his only son, or maybe murder might be a better term, in a orgy of pride and willful action. Tolkien's saying several things here, and again, important for leaders to pay attention to the several things he's saying, but the biggest thing that he's pointing out here, and we see it in the battle in Book 5 between the two titans of Gandalf and of Denethor, is that as Denethor is declining as the steward, and he could have declined in honor, he could have declined in glory, but he chose instead to decline in a different kind of way. As that declination, as the sun is setting on Gondor, Gandalf stands as the bearer not of a new thing, but the messenger of a new king, the messenger of the future. And this is what Denethor and many leaders like him don't want to hear. Look, when you retire from a role, let's say it's a role at a company, let's say it's a leadership role in a civic organization, let's even say it's a leadership role in a government, you should have prepared other people to take your place. The graveyards are full of indispensable men. I believe it was Charles de Gaulle who pointed that out, and the leader of the French resistance and the eventual prime minister of France after World War II. And now the graveyard is full of Denethor, who believed he was indispensable too. Someone will lead if you don't, and if you don't prepare people to lead as a leader, the wisest individuals will not lead. It will instead be the least ethical, the least moral, and the least capable. One other thing to remember, and this is very important, I think, for leaders, and Denethor gives a shadow of this, but of course, when he does, you have to consider that Tolkien is constructing an idea. He's world building an idea of monarchy that comes from, well, quite frankly, the British Empire. So we can't take too much from this in our modern era. But, here's the but, one of the things that sort of winds through the story of Denethor, Faramir, Boromir, and Gandalf, their quadrangle of a dynamic, the thing that winds through all of it is this: work is not your family. The work of being king was not Denethor's family, but he couldn't see it. And even if he could have seen it, he probably wouldn't have accepted it. That was also part of the Gnostic heresy. As a matter of fact, part of the Gnostic heresy included being unable to accept that fact, being unable to put it down. Or, as William Shakespeare infamously put the line in the mouth of Julius Caesar in Julius Caesar, "Always I am Caesar." Back to the book, back to Lord of the Rings. The Return of the King. We're moving on to book 6. We're going to round the corner here on the book. We're going to round the corner here on the trilogy. We're going to go to the cracks of Mount Doom. The light sprang up again, and there on the brink of the chasm, at the very crack of doom, stood Frodo, black against the glare, tense, erect, but still as if he had been turned to stone. "Master," cried Sam. Then Frodo stirred and spoke with a clear voice, indeed with a voice clearer and more powerful than Sam had ever heard him use, and it rose above the throb and turmoil of Mount Doom, ringing in the roof and walls. "I have come," he said, "but I do not choose now to do what I came to do. I will not do this deed. The ring is mine." And suddenly, as he set it on his finger, he vanished from Sam's sight. Sam gasped, but he had no chance to cry out, for at that moment many things happened. Something struck Sam violently in the back. His legs were knocked from under him, and he was flung aside, striking his head against the stony floor. As a dark shape sprang over him, he lay still for a moment, and all went black. And far away, as Frodo put on the ring and claimed it for his own, even in Allure, the very heart of his realm, the power in Barad-dûr was shaken, and the tower trembled from its foundations to its proud and bitter crown. The Dark Lord was suddenly aware of him, and his eye, piercing all shadows, looked across the plain to the door that he had made, and the magnitude of his own folly was revealed to him in a blinding flash, and all the devices of his enemies were at last laid bare. Then his wrath blazed in consuming flame, but his fear rose like a vast black smoke to choke him, for he knew his deadly peril and the thread upon which his doom now hung. From all his policies and webs of fear and treachery, from all his stratagems and wars, his mind shook free, and throughout his realm a tremor ran. His slaves quailed, and his armies halted, and his captains, suddenly steerless, bereft of will, wavered and despaired, for they were forgotten. The whole mind and purpose of the power that wielded them was now bent with overwhelming force upon the mountain. At his summons, wheeling with a rending cry, and in a last desperate race there flew, faster than the wings, the Nazgul, the ring race, and with a storm of wings they hurtled southwards to Mount Doom. Sam got up. He was dazed, and blood streaming from his head dripped in his eyes. He groped forward, and then he saw a strange and terrible thing. Gollum on the edge of the abyss was fighting like a mad thing with an unseen foe. To and fro he swayed, now so near the brink that he almost tumbled in, now drawing back, falling to the ground, rising and falling again, and all the while he hissed, but spoke no words. The fires below awoke in anger, the red light blazed, and all the cavern was filled with such a great glare and heat. Suddenly Sam saw Gollum's long hands draw upwards to his mouth, his white fangs gleamed, and they snapped as they bit. Frodo gave a cry, and there he was, fallen upon his knees at the chasm's edge, but Gollum, dancing like a mad thing, held aloft the ring, a finger still thrust within its circle. It shone now as if verily it was wrought of living fire. "Precious, precious, precious!" Gollum cried. "My precious, oh, my precious!" And with that, even as his eyes were lifted up to gloat on his prize, he stepped too far, toppled, wavered for a moment on the brink, and then with a shriek he fell. Out of the depths came his last wail, "Precious!" And he was gone. There was a roar and a great confusion of noise. Fires leaped up and licked the roof. The throbbing grew to a great tumult, and the mountain shook. Sam ran to Frodo and picked him up and carried him out the door. And there, upon the dark threshold of the Sammath Naur, high above the plains of Mordor, such wonder and terror came on him that he stood still, forgetting all else, and gazed as one turned to stone. A brief vision he had of a swirling cloud. In the midst of it towers and battlements, tall as hills, founded upon a mighty mountain throne, above immeasurable pits, great courts and dungeons, eyeless prisons, sheer as cliffs, and gaping gates of steel and adamant. And then all passed. Towers fell, and mountains slid, walls crumbled and melted, crashing down. Vast spires of smoke and spouting steam went billowing up until they toppled like an overwhelming wave, and its wild crest curled and came foaming down upon the land. And then at last, over the miles between, there came a rumble, rising to a deafening crash and roar. The earth shook, the plain heaved and cracked, and Orodruin reeled. Fire belched from its riven summit. The skies burst into thunder seared with lightning. Down like lashing whips fell a torrent of black rain, and into the heart of the storm, with a cry that pierced all other sounds, tearing the clouds asunder, the Nazgul came, shooting like flaming bolts, as caught in fiery ruin of hill and sky they crackled, withered, and went out. "Well, this is the end, Sam Gamgee," said a voice by his side. And there was Frodo, pale and worn, and yet himself again. And in his eyes there was peace now, neither strain of will, nor madness, nor any fear. His burden was taken away. There was the dear master of the sweet days in the Shire. "Master!" cried Sam, and fell upon his knees. In all that ruin of the world, for the moment he felt only joy, great joy. The burden was gone. His master had been saved. He was himself again. He was free. And then Sam caught sight of the maimed and bleeding hand. "Your poor hand," he said, "and I have nothing to bind it with or comfort it. I would have spared him a whole hand of mine rather, but he's gone now, beyond recall, gone forever." "Yes," said Frodo. "But do you remember Gandalf's words? Even Gollum may have something yet to do. But for him, Sam, I could not have destroyed the ring. The quest would have been in vain, even at the bitter end. So let us forgive him, for the quest is achieved, and now all is over. I am glad you are here with me, here at the end of all things, Sam." At the end of all things. Yeah. And so we are at the end of the Return of the King, and thus at the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. A couple of things to take from here as we think about staying on the path with using the words of J.R.R. Tolkien to help us out. At the cracks of Mount Doom, evil got a vote, right? And I'm fond of saying this, and people don't really like it because it sounds like I'm proving something, but I'm really stating a fact of reality. Evil does get a vote. Bad people do get to have an opinion. They do get to take action. They do get to engage in the world. Bad actors are going to do the things they're going to do. But that doesn't mean that good actors and good people don't get a vote. And it doesn't mean that good people are less powerful, though they may be less effective and more naive than bad people. But it doesn't mean they're powerless or completely ineffectual. See, evil may get a vote, but justice, which is outside of the hands of either good or evil, no matter what we may think of that term in the West or in humanity in general, justice gets the final word. And that is a justice that is meted out by people or by entities that are at a much higher transcendent level than we are, and who know all ends. Frodo quotes from Gandalf there about Gollum's role at the end of all things, but he forgets the first part of it, or maybe Tolkien didn't want to pull it back because it probably wasn't necessary. His readers at the time when he originally wrote this were fairly sharp, but I think in our era we need to restate it and make it plain. Even the wisest, the most intellectual, the most knowledgeable, the smartest PhDs on the planet. And by the way, I would argue that they are merely strategically and tactically smart. I wouldn't argue that they are wise, but okay, if you want to throw them in there, you can. Even the wisest of folks will not know all ends. There are small evils and there are large evils. And again, we don't have a good eschatology of evil. We don't have a good understanding of evil because once you get rid of God, thank you, Nietzsche, at the foundational parts of the West, then you get rid of evil too. It becomes psychological and sociological. The devil made me do it switches to mommy didn't hug me enough. And now all of a sudden you're off to the races. But anyway, there are minor evils and there are large evils. And Gollum was a small evil. And it took a small evil to defeat a much, much larger evil. Kind of similar to what happened in The Hobbit with that dragon Smaug, who was also a small evil. A preview of coming attractions, such as it were, with Sauron looming, or maybe it's lurking in The Hobbit in the background. There's a line in the Bible, in the book of Amos, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was wont to say this, that justice will roll down the hills like water, and it will put out all the fires. This is Hasan adding on. It will put out all the fires. It will quench all the thirsts. It will drown all the devils, and it will purify the land. Whether that land is Middle Earth, or the land is, well, the United States of America, or the West. Justice will roll down the hill like water, and it is outside of our control. What is inside our control as leaders is, as Gandalf told Frodo, seemingly a long time ago, what is up to us is to decide what we will do with the time that is given to us. Will we do good, or will we do evil? We stay on the path by doing good and letting justice work itself out. And well, that's it for me. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. If you're listening to this on any of the major podcast players, like iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, please go ahead and leave us a 5-star review and write a little bit in there. A couple of sentences is good enough. That actually helps us game those algorithms that I was just maybe addressing. And, of course, it helps us grow the show. Tell all your family, tell all your friends, and tell the leaders in your life that you know that need to be listening to this show that this show exists. By the way, if you want to get started on the leadership path yourself, or you know some people who need to go on the leadership path, HSCT Publishing, the home company of Leadership Toolbox and Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, can help you and your team do that. So check out our training webinars, coaching services, and more at leadershiptoolbox.us. We are remote, we're live, we're in person, we're on video, and we've got leadership development solutions for your civic group, nonprofit staff, public sector staff, or even your private sector leaders. And of course, you're going to want to check out our video-based subscription service at LeadingKeys.com. That's LeadingKeys.com for leadership development on demand. You don't like videos, you don't like training, but you really like the podcast? Well, I would also recommend reading a book. Matter of fact, I'd recommend reading my most recent book, 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. You can get that in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Ingram Spark, and any other place that you order books online. Finally, of course, we're on YouTube just like everybody else is. We'd love to have you help us grow the YouTube channel, so like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the HSCT Publishing channel on YouTube. Just search for HSCT Publishing, or you can search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button. Subscribing helps us grow the show, as it does with the audio, just is the same with the video. All right, that's it for me.